this past June, I went to the Portsmouth Pride up in New Hampshire. When I was walking through the displays, I came across the display that said the Trans Stow Task Force. And instantly, when I saw the word doe, I knew that there was something serious that you all were doing, and I came up to talk to you. And what I've learned and what I'm looking forward to learning is exactly what the Trans Stow Task Force is doing to help the trans community, and what are some of the stories that you have to share with us. So if you all would like to introduce yourselves to the cameras and to the world.
So I'll start. My name's Amy Michael. I'm a anthropology professor at the University of New Hampshire. I'm a later addition to the Trans Stow Task Force. So I contacted Lee and Anthony, I think maybe in March of this year, around there, because I am particularly interested in my own research focuses on using forensic anthropology and biological anthropology to solve cold cases. And so just in like doing some Googling, I'd heard of the DNA Doe project, and I found what they were doing because they've got a great social media presence. And I wrote to them, and Lee wrote me back like the next day, and I was very excited.
Okay, so just what is a cold case, just in case people don't know what that is?
So a cold case, the time varies, but it's a case that all the leads have basically been exhausted through traditional investigative means. And so law enforcement might turn to not necessarily alternative methods, but maybe some methods that aren't used in every case. My experience with cold cases has been in Michigan and in Idaho before New Hampshire. I was working at universities there. So I encountered cold cases that ranged from like, you know, a couple years old, and they just had like, law enforcement just had no idea who the decedent was or who the victim was. All the way, I think that my most recent case that I was working on was a 1981 cold case and recovery, where they knew who the individual was, or they had an inkling of who the victim was, but no suspects. And so those cases appeal to me because I like to use forensic anthropology and skeletal biology to help law enforcement solve them. But you know, there's this social justice issue and aspect to it too, and that's where Lee and Anthony, I think, are doing like this amazing like cutting edge work, and I knew that I really wanted to be a part of that work with them.
I'm Lee Bingham Redgrave, and I work as a forensic genealogist with the DNA Doe project, and I've been doing that for about a year and a half, a little more than a year and a half. And 6 months into working that project, it occurred to me that we were working on Jane Does and John Does, but what if there was a trans Doe somewhere that maybe people weren't paying close attention to how they were being classified, and maybe that was preventing their identification. So I started thinking, and Anthony and I started doing research to try to find a case like this, and we found one right away and talked with the people at the DNA Doe project about whether or not we could find a way to take this case on. And then we kept finding more cases, and quickly discovered that we would need to kind of form a side project, which is what the Trans Doe Task Force is a satellite to the DNA Doe project. It's not officially linked. The DNA Doe project is a 501c3, and the Trans Doe Task Force is just a grassroots collaborative effort. So we find the cases, and we do the research behind the cases, and bundle it up and send it to the DNA Doe project, and then they'll contact the law enforcement department to see if they can take the case.
Wow. For me, as a transgender woman, I understand the fear that a lot of my community has of harm happening. And this is going to be an intense conversation that we're going to have, because we're going to be talking about harm that has happened to one another and happened to other people. And so Anthony, you're like one of the brainchilds of the project too. If you'd like to kind of explain your role in.
My name is Anthony Redgrave. I am also a forensic genealogist with the DNA Doe project, and I'm a current doctoral student of transformative leadership and education. My doctoral work is going to be in developing training courses for law enforcement that have to do with doing forensic genealogy so that they can do it in-house and don't have to hire out to other people, so they can have more control over the process themselves and reduce the chain of custody on evidence and be able to control contacting people if they need to and not have to do a lot of back and forth and save money. There was a gap in understanding in human anthropology of how a trans or intersex decedent might look long after they've died, and like identifying somebody from skeletal remains. There's such a wide, I've learned from Amy, there's a large range of ways that humans can present, and what does hormone treatment do to that? What does surgery do to that? Like how does that look if a person is unidentified and found long after they're recognizable? There's a problem with the classification system because it's not black and white, and it's not black and white even for cisgender people. And so thinking about that and thinking about how the language that's used in science and medicine and the language that's used socially very frequently don't meet up, because science thinks things are black and white when they're not, and we're still catching up on that. And people think things are black and white in ways that they aren't. And so it became important to recognize that there's such a push for, there's such interest in cold case and true crime right now that it's the time to talk about this problem. When we started the Transdo Task Force and we started looking into cases where there were people who were deceased and might have been trans or intersex or cross-dressing or anything, we found that the way that they're classified inside of legal systems might not reflect the way that they were in life, might not reflect the way that they were identified by their loved ones when they were reported missing, so they might not have been compared in the system in the first place. And what does that mean when they are identified? What does that mean for identifying them to family or their chosen family? Like, how is that going to be different, and how is that going to be approached from a respectful place? Who's going to do that? My role is a lot of developing public education, developing public outreach, and also hopefully being able to suggest ways to fix the problem and then teaching people how to do it.
Are there numbers, like how many cold cases, let's say, do you think that you've hit upon just for transgender people?
I have a recent estimate on cold cases in general, but an estimate on trans cold cases is maybe harder to come by because of reporting.
Okay.
And you can maybe confirm this, that the number that I heard recently is about 2,000 cases of unidentified remains go unsolved. Is that per year? Is that per year? 2,000 per year?
That sounds about right, and then we have the competing issue of individuals who have never been found. Right, so you have the missing, you have the unidentified, then you have the unclaimed. And so in the States here, we have an organization called NamUs, and a lot of the case research is gleaning information from NamUs, right? Mm-hmm. So Lee and Anthony are doing something that I feel is like critically important, and all the volunteers that work with the Transdo Task Force too, which is going through and identifying those cases, mining places or mining sites like NamUs, mining like Trans Day of Remembrance lists, things like this, because, and sometimes that, and you guys can speak better to this, but sometimes it's just like one little detail that might kick this into, like, maybe this is a trans or gender variant person that we're looking at, and, you know, police in 1985 were not thinking that. It is maddening to think like we don't have real numbers to report, because I feel like if we did have you know, solid numbers, sometimes research dollars come along with that, sometimes grants come along with that, right? But Lee is right. I mean, all we can really know is a general ballpark number of cold cases, but that doesn't count people who never get found and who sometimes never even get reported missing. Right, we're talking about sometimes, in all cold cases, sometimes really vulnerable people and populations. And so, like, hard numbers are difficult to come by. Further complicating that issue is finding individual cases that might have been people living as transgender or gender variant during life.
So I'd like to kind of hear a story of one of your cases.
So it was a case, the first case that we found was the case of Julie Doe out of Florida. One of my friends had sent me a link to an article about a detective in Florida who had it was a new cold case detective, had taken on this case from a detective who had retired and was trying to reinvigorate the case by doing DNA testing, and this was in 2014. It was an article that was a few years old that she had sent me. And so the article explained that it was a person who had been originally identified as a Jane Doe, originally identified and stayed that way from, was it 1988?
1988.
to 2014, nobody had any idea that she was transgender. They just thought that she was a cisgender female with a robust build, was how they had phrased it. And there were various studies done by some top anthropologists that didn't find anything out of the ordinary other than this is a deceased female and we don't know who she is. So in 2014, they did DNA testing and came back with a karyotype of XY. And they went, oh, we better take another look at these remains. And they pulled out her remains, and with new, more advanced learning, took another look and went, wow, we've made a mistake here. What if somebody had reported a missing son and this was this person, and those two stories would never have connected in the system. Because if somebody was reported as male and missing, and then this was a Jane Doe, they don't compare across categories whatsoever. So if her family had reported her missing before her transition, this is a story of somebody who has taught a lot of people a lot of things.
It speaks to cognitive bias in our field of forensic anthropology too. Mike Warren, who I think is the anthropologist that worked on that in Florida, he presented on Julie Doe 2 presentations at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences a few years ago. And one of his entire presentations was about this, this is a cognitive bias problem. If you're looking for a male individual, you're going to find a male skeleton. And so I think that what Lee summarized just now is that, and what Anthony alluded to earlier, is that the human skeleton, I mean, we're working on all humans are variable, right? Including your pelvis, which is the site of sex estimation. And so what we find as anthropologists is that, yeah, there are some slam dunk, this looks very biologically male or very biologically female, but the majority of us fall in a spectrum where it's well, a certain aspect of the pelvis might look biologically male, and a certain aspect of the brow ridge might look biologically female, but what story does that really tell about the living person? And then once you take gender variance into consideration too, I can talk all day long about skeletal remains, but if that's not how this person identified in life, then it does not really matter in the story of positive identification of that individual.
I liked hearing you say that even our skeletons are on a continuum.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, we're in such, you were talking earlier, such a binary world that you don't cross that fence. And transgender people, that's what we're famous for, is for crossing that fence and taking our own lives into our own hands and presenting the world with who we in fact are. So I like that just that possible bias of, oh, this is a male or a female based simply on the pelvis, is that, so that's slowly being moved away in the professional field of it?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you're a science teacher, the scientists at large, you have some very conservative belief systems still in a lot of fields of biological sciences for sure, but as anthropologists, who are the people that law enforcement is going to call on to help identify human remains if you just have an unknown skeleton, we do tend to be more sort of culturally sensitive, I think, for lack of a better term, and at least interested in these topics. So we're not going to, I'll kind of pat my own field on the back here a little bit and say that, it would really shock me now in 2019 to hear a fellow anthropologist say, I definitely know this is a male, or I definitely know this is a female. And even if we were to say, wow, this skeleton really looks like a biological male, we'd still caveat that and say, skeletally this person presents like they were a biological female or a biological male, but culturally, all we can do is look at human remains and tell the story of your biology, which is not your gender.
Did you find pushback when you all were starting your research on it?
Well, actually, the one of the co-leaders of the DNA Doe project, Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, had been at the presentation that the anthropologist had given at the forensic science meeting, and had heard this presentation about this case. So as soon as I brought it up, she was like, "Oh, I know what case you're talking about, and I want it."
That's wonderful. That's yes,
she was
timing.
like, "Yes,
that's good.
I know exactly who to talk to," and she had already made that connection. So those wheels started turning really fast. Unfortunately, that was already over a year ago. We've been having a lot of trouble getting enough DNA extracted from her bones to send to be sequenced at a lab so that we can produce the kit to upload to the comparison websites where we can try to figure out who she is based on her cousins, which is how forensic genealogy works.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up, how that's how it works. So there's a DNA database somewhere then that I guess, like, if you were to extract DNA from me, you would then go out and find matching DNA or similar DNA to say, oh, you're part of this family here.
So what law enforcement uses and what we use are different things. The law enforcement database is collectively called CODIS, which is the Combined DNA Index System. Is that correct? So what that is it uses like a couple of very specific markers in a person's sequence that are generally different from person to person and shared from parent to child and across siblings. But that means that when somebody who is an unknown perpetrator of a crime or an unknown decedent, if they're run through that, if they don't already have their DNA or their mother or father's DNA or a full sibling, they're not going to produce a match. So what we do is more like what's done when you're an adoptee or you don't know who your father is and you take a DNA test from Ancestry or 23andMe, and you use that information to figure out who you're genetically related to, who are your close or distant cousins, and find the parts of you that they have in them and figure out what ancestor that came from and trace it down to whoever might be that you or the unidentified person's parents. It's sort of like doing a really big game of Sudoku.
So the research you're doing then is online. You're comparing DNA of this person and you're going to see, okay, can I go find matching DNA with a lot of matches? And once you do that, then you start funneling it down until you get to one person that you think, okay, this is the person's parent. And once that happens, you think, okay, I've got this person identified. Do you contact the police and then you hand it over to them? Is that how it works? It's like, okay, here's what we think we have.
It's a very good question, and part of the reason that we realized we would need to form the TransDoe task force for the trans cases that we were going to find. Because the DNA Doe project, absolutely, when we have a potential identification and we're pretty sure and we're ready to hand it off to law enforcement, as soon as we hand it off to law enforcement, we stop. It's up to them to do their due diligence to confirm that potential identification and then to notify that family and make whatever further arrangements are going to be made. And the DNA Doe project, you know, we might show up for the press conference and explain how we got to the identification, but other than that, our job is done. But with the trans case, we were trying to think, how would this play out? Are we just going to be handing them a dead name?
Exactly.
Is that helpful? How can we bookend, you know, if we're going to find these cases and hand them to the DNA Doe project, how can we bookend after identification to fix that problem that's gonna happen? Because you need a legal identification in order to produce a death certificate. You're going to have to find the person's dead name and you're going to have to tell it to the police. So what we're hoping that TransDoe Task Force will do is, after the DNA Doe project has their first TransDoe recommended solve, the DNA Doe project is able to hand that person's legal name off to the police. TransDoe Task Force will come back in.
Okay.
And we will try to connect with that law enforcement agency and the local media in that area, wherever that person, you know, where their family is going to be living, and try to kind of be like emissaries for that person's story. So we can try to reach out to the community and figure out, can we find maybe their friends who remember them? If their family happens to not be interested or is no longer living, can we find their chosen family? Can we find out, did they have a name they preferred? Did they have a different way they would want to be represented in the media, and can we then push that for them?
That is so powerful. I mean, it's allowing our stories to be told. Able to go to the police and actually say, this is the language that goes with this person. This is who they are. Just brings peace to their friends and to the community, whether their family accepts them or not. You're impacting our community by we're hearing our story told in a way that otherwise we don't get to hear at all. And you were just talking about the pillar point. When you're doing your part of the forensic anthropology and you're studying skeletons, do you also do the reconstructions?
For Julius especially, they had a new reconstruction, a new approximation issued that was done by a technically very good artist who I've seen other work from that's very good, but he just didn't have the experience with knowing much about trans people, which, you know, it is okay. We have an artist who helps out with the DNA Doe project, Carl Koppelman, and he's amazing. He has had actually a number of identifications happen because of his art, because it's just so lifelike and amazing what he does. And he did a new image of Julie that's just, I think it's like breathtaking. It goes from, you know, here's a person that, you know, may have been plausibly alive, but I don't think I want to keep looking at this picture, versus this is somebody who could have been my friend, this is somebody I wish I knew. And just making people look and getting people to look goes a long way to helping the identification process, the publicity process of getting people to know what we're doing and what we're about.
Earlier, a previous case that's ongoing as well that is close to fruition, you think? Would you like to talk about what that one is?
When we started the Trans Doe Task Force, we had a handful that we pushed forward to the DNA Doe project, and we asked them to reach out to the agencies and see if they'd be interested in working with us. Julie's detective was already on board, and the second one is San Mateo, or Pillar Point Doe, who was found in the San Mateo area of San Francisco, and
Specifically Half Moon Bay.
Half Moon Bay, yeah, on the beach. They were found early in the morning on the beach, hours after being really brutally killed.
So technically recognizable.
Technically.
And the art that was made at the time is basically just a sketch. And you know, the detectives have, yes, it's a cold case, but the detectives in the department have continually kept it in their interest. They've been continually trying to figure out what is the next new way we might be able to identify this person. And it's a case that's been in the media occasionally, mostly because of the Bay Area Reporter doing a good job of covering it occasionally over the years. But this was definitely a case we knew that we wanted to reach out to the department, because we were expecting that they would be very, very excited to hear from us.
Mm-hmm. So we definitely had luck, and they because they were found so recently after dying, there was what's called a blood card, which is it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a blood sample on a card, and those are usually the best thing that we can get a DNA sequence out of. The Pillar Point case, they were found early in the morning on the beach, having been really brutally beaten and stabbed, and was classified as assigned male at birth, and
John Doe.
Yeah, John Doe, but dressed obviously as female. Like was wearing female clothing and breast forms and everything. And so we say singular they because we don't know how this person identified in life, and you know, maybe they were doing drag, maybe they were a cross-dresser, maybe they weren't identifying as actually trans, but we don't know. But obviously this is one of our own that we need to take care of. It's going a little slower than I expected it to go for us, but it's definitely going to be solved.
Yes, the genealogy team has been working very, very hard since the end of March, and we've found a lot of family. This person has a lot of family, a lot of common ancestors already in the tree. The main problem that we've been having is that a lot of their ancestors were actually Mormon pioneers, and many of them had many wives and many, many, many children. So when you're looking for descendants, you're dealing with people who maybe have 100 grandchildren. That's 100 lines of descendancy that you then have to go and look.
Wow.
So it's getting a little bananas.
When we started the case, we were like, oh, white Caucasian, this shouldn't be too hard. But what it turns out is that because people who are descended from Mormon pioneers, people who are members of the LDS Church, have already, they're responsible for making the computer format for family trees that we use. They invented that.
Yeah.
They
so-
know exactly where they came from, so they don't take DNA tests.
Yep,
So
Mormons
that's
already
another
know their family trees.
underrepresented population.
What are some ways that we can help your organization to solve these cases?
Definitely, if you're comfortable with uploading your DNA, that's certainly one of the most invaluable things people can do. I'm wearing an example of one of our shirts. We have a swag shop on Threadless. You can get to from our website, which is transdotaskforce.org, and it has mugs and sweatshirts and stickers and different things like that, and that just goes right back towards helping us to maintain the website and just be able to get around to the different events that we're getting around to.
And Patreon.
Yeah, we do have a Patreon. We have a few patrons right now, and hoping to get some more and get some feedback of what content people would like to see there for members-only content.
People who have a voice and feel like they want to put it somewhere, they can come to us and offer to write blog posts or do research, or contact their local newspaper and tell them about us, anything like that. Like, that's just as important as, going and buying a t-shirt or making a donation or taking a DNA test or donating to the DNA Doe Project. You can do that too.
People can donate directly to the Trans Doe's lab fees through the DNA Doe Project website. Then they just use PayPal. And you can write a note in your PayPal donation, please put this towards the next Trans Doe Task Force case, and they'll do that.
I just want you to know that this will go out to people that will hopefully appreciate it and see what you're doing and will want to help somehow or another.
And that's the beauty of it. We can help. Like, this has been a problem endemic to the community for decades, and so many people have died or gone missing, and it hurts all of us when that happens. And that's why Pride events got started. They started as a pushback to the violence, and so this is something we can do to help those people who have already gone, that we can give them back something.
And we can also give the community a little bit of hope. Keep saying hopefully this and hopefully that. It's what it's about. It's about hope. Working in cold cases is always about
Absolutely.
hope.
Hope dies last.
Yeah. And also healing.
Absolutely.
Well, folks, thank you all so much for this wonderful episode. I appreciate it. And folks out there, this is one of those tough episodes, and I hope everybody's okay. Make sure you take care of yourself and know that, yes, harm does happen to our community, but there's also a lot of loving and kind people out there that are fighting for our community, including our own community. And just keep doing the good work that you're doing, and people out there, keep doing the good work that you're doing. Thank you.